Hi, my name's Gary Cole, and you're listening to The Football Coaching Life, a podcast brought to you by Football Coaches Australia and Making Media, the podcast professionals. We're very lucky to have the support of Football Coaches Australia and Making Media because we're talking to Australia's men and women, the coaches who we hand over the responsibility to develop our players and our teams. And in the main, these stories haven't been told. So I'm honoured and very thankful to have as today's guest the head coach of Canberra United in the W League, Vicki Linton. Welcome, Vicki.
Thanks, Gary. It's good to be chatting to you today.
It's incredibly good to have you here because this has been been working on this for a while, and I do appreciate you being here because I know that this is not necessarily your favourite pastime, talking about yourself. But at the end of the day, and hopefully I got this message across, the talking to you of your coaching journey is, I found, has been important for other coaches because there's so much knowledge and wisdom, and I think it's a great opportunity for people to learn. So, firstly, congratulations! Came back to Australia. Well, actually, I didn't introduce you properly. So Vicki had a career as a player here, played rep football, and I don't know a lot about your playing career, but I do know you played for New South Wales and I think Australia at junior level. Played college in the USA. Was encouraged into coaching at a young age, and I've had a remarkable journey as a coach, head coach at Tasmanian Institute of Sport, assistant with a young Australian junior teams, assistant Matildas coach with Alan Stadgic at the World Cup, I think, in 2015. Wonderful work as a FIFA coach development instructor in Oceania and Asia, which was fantastic. And you're recently back from 3 years working with United States Soccer Federation, is that how we pronounce that?
Yeah. US Soccer.
US Soccer, developing and helping academy directors grow and mature. So, and obviously, first coach to help Melbourne Victory make the finals in the W League, which you did for a couple of years in a row. So, some wonderful all-round experience there. So welcome. This is nothing to do with your playing career, but just give us a quick background into your playing career, and did your playing career impact your decision into coaching?
I'd have to say it did, because I wouldn't be here if I wasn't playing. So I started at the age of 6. It was that was early 80s, 1980, I suppose. And there wasn't a lot of soccer for girls at that time. But my friends in the street were joining up and playing soccer, and that they happened to be boys, but I didn't kind of realise that. And I came home and said to my mum, I want to play soccer. And she just took me along and signed me up. And I was the only girl in the whole junior club, I think. And as I went through to under 12s, I was the only girl, in the association. So that was here in Manly Warringah, before I had to progress into girls only soccer. But so playing since I was 6 years old. As you said, progressed through to playing in the state league here, and I got to play for Australia at the World University Games, and that kind of opened up my eyes to college soccer in the US. Yeah. So, and then shortly after that, I went across and played at college. And so I think early on, there was a couple of coaches who planted the seed about coaching in me. And I think the first recollection I have of that was when I was 16, 17 in one of the state teams, and my state team coach kind of just, I don't know if it was a throwaway line or how intentional he was about that, but just said you'd be a good coach one day. And then I think after my college experience, I think that coach had a real big impact on me, and that was further, implanted in me the idea of becoming a coach. So I started doing my coach education while I was still playing, and it was through injury that I couldn't continue playing at the level or playing the way I wanted to be able to play. So I quickly transitioned straight across into coaching. So I don't know, it was just something. There's obviously a passion and a love of the game that I wasn't ready to walk away from the game. And I was probably always better playing up here than I was, athletically. So it seemed a natural fit for me to go into coaching.
Vicki, did that happen? Did the initial part of your coach education happen in the US, or once you were back here in Australia?
No, it was here. So, in New South Wales, I did the old level 2. I think it was that 1997. So I did a level 2 and started off coaching in like the pathway programs through Soccer New South Wales. So it was back then, it was the junior elite training program, the JETS program. And I think it was a zoned program. It was north, south, east and west, and it was for 9 to 12-year-olds, and it was the underpinning programs leading into their state team programs. So I started doing that, and then so when I had finished playing, and whether it would have happened while I was still playing, not sure, but I did end up to finish playing. Then I started working in the state team programs with Soccer New South Wales, which was what it was called back then.
And how important do you think to your coaching now? How important was it to get those early opportunities to coach at that level with good quality players?
Yeah, I think it. I think it was fantastic. I suppose they saw I was doing some development work for Soccer New South Wales under Anissa Tan-Darby, and she was someone who, ex-Australian captain or national team player, and she coached us at Marconi in the WSL back then, and so she was running up that development program, and so I think because I was in and around Soccer New South Wales, I got this opportunity, and I think they saw it was good for someone, a current player, or someone who was playing, to be involved in those sort of programs. And so it was good for the players, but also good for me, to work with some good players. And I did get the opportunity to do that, certainly in those junior state teams that I ended up working with. And I think that's a direct relation to where I've come. Being able to work in good environments under good people with good structures I think, has really helped me.
Yeah. And how did the opportunity at the Tasmanian Institute of Sport come about?
Yeah, I wanted to be a full-time coach, and I wanted to coach in the NTC system. And there's only 8 of those jobs in the country, and I couldn't get the job here in New South Wales, or all the other jobs were sewn up pretty much. And that was a new program. That was a brand new program opening up down there in Tassie. And so it was something, as I said, I wanted to be a full-time coach. And so I applied for it and got the opportunity to go down there and start up a brand new program. And that's something that I now see in my career as I've gone on. It's something I really enjoy, in being able to come in and create something new, or even if it's been existing, renew it, and build something. And I look back and I was pretty young and inexperienced, but I had some good people around me to help me, and it was a great opportunity for me, and I really loved it. And that springboarded me on to the next steps after that.
Is it a place that when you're working at that level in that area, a place to experiment with your coaching, to make mistakes, to review them, refresh them, learn, grow, and move on? How important do you think that opportunity was?
Yeah. You probably don't think that at the time, right? But you can look back and see that that's what was happening. Yeah. And I think with the Tassie program, one, where it is and that it was new. So there were certainly some challenges, but to be honest, so there was the male program going on at the same time, and I was working with a very experienced male coach on the other side, and so that was brilliant. And so that helped me, and I learned a lot through that. But I did have freedom, and I did have freedom to try things, and I can look back and think how that was useful for me, without pressure. So I didn't have the pressure on me. It was a really good experience, and I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I like that. And that led on then to an opportunity with the Australian under-17 team?
Yeah, and it's interesting to, when I look back and obviously get asked questions about this over time, but I'm very grateful that I've been able to work through every kind of level of the system in Australia. So starting off with those junior elite programs to state teams. So I was assistant coach and then a head coach of state teams. And then I was assistant coach of the New South Wales Academy before I went down to be a head coach down in Tassie. And then I was an assistant coach with the under 17 team, national team, before I was a head coach of the junior national team. Yeah. And I had the opportunity. Tom Samani was the head coach of the Matildas at the time. His assistant coach was Robbie Hooker. Yeah. And Robbie Hooks ended up being the head coach of the under 17s, and I was invited to be the assistant coach working with him. And it was just a really great time for me as a young coach to be working with people like that. And I think that's set me up really well. And I look back on that, and even just this last season, just thinking back how well grounded I was in some, I suppose, really good values or really good ways of operating as a coach by guys like that. Yeah. And then when I did become the under 17 coach, head coach, it was great. We were away in China, and Tom, as the head coach of the senior national team, was there with me, and I could walk down the corridor and knock on his door and ask him questions. And so, it was a really good experience, and going step by step. And I think that was really valuable in my development, that I went all the way through. And that's continued all the way through. So an assistant coach with the old New South Wales Sapphires back in the National League before I became a head coach down at Melbourne Victory, and then assistant coach with the senior national team, So all the way through, I've just progressed step by step up through the system.
That's a great credit to you, because it's in coaching, being an assistant coach can be all care and no responsibility. It can be a really nice, comfortable place for coaches to work. But that's not been a place where you've been happy and settled for. That's been a place of learning so you can grow into the head coaching role on your journey. I think that's fair? Yeah.
It's interesting. The roles are very, very different. So, because at the same time you can be a little bit frustrated or a little bit, anxious to try and do things on your own. And I think at times too, when I haven't been in full-time jobs, you're doing 2 and 3 things. And so while I might have been doing an assistant coach, say with the junior national team, I was head coach of another program. And I think that's useful as well. Yeah. When you are an assistant coach, to be having avenues where you are leading and when you have the responsibility and when you can do things and make decisions for yourself. Yeah.
Let's go sideways a little bit. Congratulations on Cambridge United making the W League finals, first time for I think 3 or 4 seasons. And I know you would have been disappointed to go out the semi-final, but a great season, some wonderful highlights to see Michelle Heyman back scoring goals for fun. Must have brought a great deal of satisfaction. I think you gave 7 players their W League debuts. You get to build a new culture all over again. So to tell us a little bit about that, about how much you've enjoyed that. But I'm guessing that all started with you building the culture that you wanted to build, or starting to build the culture that you wanted to build at Canberra United.
Yeah. So I haven't had a team to coach myself since 2014. So that's quite a long time.
Coaching coaches.
I was an assistant with the senior national team through 2015, 2016, through the World Cup and the Rio Olympics. And then following that, I went overseas to work with US Soccer. So while I was doing a little bit of coaching, I hadn't coached a team since 2014. So it's really interesting coming into that, because while I hadn't coached or had been a head coach of a team for 6 years, I felt like I was a much better coach through the experiences that I had. So I was kind of itching and ready to go to implement some new ideas or new ways of doing things or trying new things while building on things that I know work and that you can be successful with. So I was pretty excited about that. I think while you're going through the season, it's hard work.
Oh, yeah.
And you don't get to sit back and enjoy it. But I think come the end of the season, and there's a lot of there's reflection through the season. But when you get to the end of the season, and you get time to look back on all the things that have panned out the way you wanted, the things that you have achieved, and I suppose even just feedback. You go through a lot of meetings with players and staff, and just seeing the impact the season has had on them. And I think that's where you get the satisfaction, and those sort of things are very rewarding.
Yeah. A little dicky bird told me, I can't reveal my sources here, but that you this year you've worked hard to involve the players in the match analysis, game analysis. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I suppose I hadn't seen it that way, but I think one of the things that I've learned over the last few years with US soccer and being in the role I was, which was, well, the way I see it, I'm a coach, right? So the way I saw it, I was coaching academy directors, I was coaching other coaches, and I got to be exposed to a lot of different environments because US soccer has a lot of diversity in how they do things, and that was great. But the element of what I was doing was the same, but it was going in and having to help them, so sit back and watch and reflect and kind of guide them on how to improve what they were doing, their processes, their thinking, whatever it was. And I think by doing that, I also was exposed to a really talented bunch of colleagues. So not just the academy directors, but also my fellow colleagues and the other people I met through US soccer. And it was a time when you're not hands-on coaching to be able to do a little bit more professional development. Yeah, I kind of saw it as like maybe a sabbatical where you can just do something a little bit different, be challenged in a different way. And I think through that, there was a lot of learning for me. Yeah, I know this is a long answer, but so one of the biggest things I took out of that was about learning and how do people learn. Yeah, and so I suppose what we did with players is have them involved, is because to me it's more important what they're doing, what they're learning, what they're taking out of things, rather than what I'm telling them. Obviously, I want to guide that and facilitate that, but I think my coaching philosophy, whether it's in the video room or on the field, is really about that. How are they learning? How am I leading them to know more and understand more, rather than how much, it all coming from me or other coaches all the time.
Can I drill down into that a little bit more, particularly with your experience in coaching the coaches in the US? On this podcast and in the, I'm going to say hundreds, it's probably millions of conversations I've had in the past couple of years. A part of the criticism in Australia of the way coach education has gone is that it's become more academic. Coach education used to be led by, firstly, good coaches that obviously had coach education qualifications, people like you that have coached players, coached teams, helped those grown, and then have gone to share that wisdom in coaches. I don't know whether do you think that's a fair observation or not, and I wonder what the American take of that goes, whether that's something that's happening in America, or because you're obviously involved there in coach education, whether someone and the people like you are out there delivering from a point of what works best with the players, not necessarily the theory of what works best with the players. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and just to clarify, so I wasn't technically in coach education, which was a good thing from my point of view. So we're kind of technical advisors was the initial role. So they purposely identified and targeted coaches to bring into those roles because it was a technical focus. Yeah. And our role in club development, as I said, that's how I took it, as coaching the coaches or mentoring. It was really mentoring. Okay. And so it was informal. So I wasn't out delivering courses, which is great because to be honest, it's not really a passion of mine.
Yeah.
But the idea of helping coaches learn and grow, I like, because that's more to me like what we do with players.
Yeah.
And we can talk more about the game. But going to your question, I think that. So I've worked in the US. I've also worked for the FA way back. That was my first full-time job in football back in 2003. And just spending time in Asia and the AFC and doing things with FIFA and those sort of things. Like I've been exposed to a lot of different things, and I think that's been one of the best things for my career. Yeah. And especially, and we're jumping around a little bit, but going back to what you asked and going step by step, interspersed with all those things within Australia were things overseas.
Yeah.
And I think as a young female coach at the time, those things were useful in my progression.
Yeah.
And so maybe externally, but also internally, to give me confidence to go through. So kind of with that mindset, what I'd say is I think what I'm seeing, there was a lot of similarities in the US that there were in Australia. And the number of people there that mainly were foreigners as well.
Yeah.
And so talking to them about what's happening back in their countries, and they were majority European, there seems to be a flavour or a trend or themes that must go around in coach education around the world. So people start to do something one way, and then they must get together at some international forum, right? And then it just spreads. So I would say that US soccer kind of went through a bit of a phase of what we did 10, 15 years ago. And to me, they were going through that and the way they changed things and the way they did things. And maybe 10 years ago, they didn't go to the extent of getting a national curriculum, because that would never work in the US. As I said, diversity is really valued over there.
Yeah.
But in regards to coach education, and I know the key coach educators and the guys who had implemented the changes there were in contact with people from FFA.
Yeah.
And I know there's a lot of similarities to it. So to answer your question is, I think they went the same way we did.
Yeah.
And I think US soccer has its own complexities. US Soccer Federation is not the only organisation who runs coach education in the country. And there's differing bodies who do that.
Yeah. I think the Coaches Association is heavily involved in coach education, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just very varied. It's a lot. There's more variety and diversity there.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. You're listening to The Football Coaching Life, a podcast brought to you by Football Coaches Australia and Making Media, the podcast professionals. Today's guest is Canberra United W League head coach Vicki Linton, and we're honoured to have her on the show today. You mentioned we've jumped around a little bit, Vicki. That seems to be the nature of the beast on this podcast. So let's jump around once more. Was there, on your playing and early coaching journey, was there someone that stood out as a coach where you went, wow, this has sort of opened my eyes in terms of what coaching could be? Do you have someone that had that sort of impact on you?
Yeah, I don't really recall that. I think as a player, there were just certain coaches who, it wasn't that evident at the time, but there were certain coaches that obviously felt had an impact on me as a player, and therefore I respected. We had a coach, Vic Makovsky at Sydney Olympic way back, and he was a great coach. Great football knowledge, and he seemed to manage our team full of very strong personality players really, really well. Yeah. And I loved his approach, not just in his training methods, but how he managed. But I was 18 and probably couldn't take that in at the time. Yeah. As I said, the college environment had a big impact on me, and I've lived and worked in the US 4 different times over my career, over the last 25 years. And I think it had a big impact on me. And I think a lot of that had to do with my coach there and my assistant coach, who the assistant coach was a high-profile ex-player, and she was fantastic. But so one of the things, and even just alluding to what we're talking about just before, is, you know, there was one time we were sitting on a bus on an away trip, and he sat down and was having a chat to me, and he was trying to describe something that he'd started seeing in me as a player. And I was like, well, why didn't you just tell me? And he just kind of wryly smiled at me and kind of didn't really respond. And I found that infuriating as a player. But, you know, in hindsight, I now understand kind of what he was doing. It wasn't about him just telling me. The environment allowed me to learn it and get there on my own. And as a coach now, I think I really appreciate how to do, like, how that can be done, and how do I intentionally and purposely create an environment. And you've got a whole squad of players, so it's really hard, but that's the challenge, to create a learning environment so they get to where, as a team, we get to where we need to be. And then within that, the deeper layers, individuals getting the things that they need to continue to learn and develop. And so I think those, you know, so it's those as a player, and then as a coach, as I said, I've talked about Tom Samani. It's had a big influence on me as a player, and he was around when I was going through those steps of going into the TIS and then going to Melbourne Victory and coming into the youth national teams, and I was in and around that environment. And then I think it's been I've always been one to knock on doors and ask questions and ask if I can come along and look at things. And so there's been different coaches in different countries along the way that have influenced me. And as I said, my American experience has, and I think Anton Dorrance and his training methods have impacted me, or the American competitiveness. And that was a stark difference, you know, from what we had here in Australia. And it was something that culturally is different. But as a coach, I wanted to help create that environment. And one of the things he used to talk about, and would still talk about now, is creating an environment that allows females, women, girls to compete. Because that wasn't necessarily the case. Like for boys, it's natural. But sometimes females need permission. And I think it might have changed a little bit now, but I'm talking back in the 90s, you know, and that just creating that. And he created an environment that allowed his players and his teams to compete. And that's something that I wanted to bring back here. And the mentality and the different things that I've learned in the US about mentality and the mentality in training and the mentality to development and your own career and to games.
Good on you. So what then is coaching?
I think it means different things in different contexts, but I think in essence it is helping someone to grow or learn or develop. So I think simply that's what it is. And I think in a team coaching context, there's a lot of elements to that. So I think as a head coach, you create a framework to get everyone on the same page and moving in the same direction, and then facilitate the learning, as I said, with the team goals in mind, and then the individual development goals in mind as well.
They're definitely about helping people develop new or improve on behaviours.
You know, and that's the simplicity of it. And so you see coaching in lots of areas, right?
Absolutely.
So there's coaching as a head coach. There's coaching with your assistant coaches and staff, and obviously with the players. So for me in my coaching philosophy, it's very much about working with people, working with the players, and getting them to take another step forward, trying to achieve their goals, trying to reach their potential. Learn, grow and develop.
Yeah. I heard, I was driving in to do this a few weeks ago and listening to a podcast about business, and they were talking about aspiration versus capability. And I couldn't help because I was coming in here to talk to coaches about coaching, and I went, that is a really, really interesting concept, because we're encouraged to have a coaching philosophy, and we whatever it is, we want to play with a high intensity attacking possession based brand of football or whatever, and we arrive at this particular place in time with this particular group of players, and that might be the goal, but it might not be attainable right now. So the capability of this group right now might mean we can do these things. Do you think that's a fair statement?
I think that's a very fair statement. Yeah. And I think it's something that's coming through the system here, and being a NTC coach, being a national team coach, and really working towards a certain playing style. Yeah. I think it's been good for me to go out of that and be exposed to different things to then really clarify for me and refine for me what I'm about or how I see things. Yeah. And I think that there's certain values that you have as a person. I think there's certain values you have as in regards to football, and certain ways you want to play. But I do think you need to be pragmatic, and you can stick to your values while doing things a little bit differently. Yeah. And I think as I've gone on as a coach, I think I've learned that it doesn't, you can stay true to what you're about and maybe do it in different ways. Yeah.
No, I like that. I like that a lot. And the reality, particularly of high performance coaching, is that, we want to do this, and I've never met a coach yet that doesn't want to win and play pretty. But there are days where winning is king, key, queen, whatever it is. It's the most important thing that we can do if we want to keep our jobs.
Yeah, and I think, but we also want to be, we want to be successful, and we want to, as in, not necessarily win, but we want to find this is how I see it. Yeah. We want to solve the problem of, okay, you've got these 11 players or these 20 players. How do they fit together? Yeah. And we want to, that's how I see head coaching. It's like, I need to solve that. Yeah. And how does that work? And what's that going to look like? And that might be formation, and it might be different combinations of players on the field, or it might be certain tactical things that work for this group of players. And I think that's, to me, that's the enjoyment. Yeah. And if I just reflect on this last season, and that's why it does need to be longer, because I feel like we didn't have quite enough time once we got to where we needed to be to then really exploit that. Yeah. But it took some time. Yeah. And with a brand new group of players, I'm new, everything's new, and it took us a little bit of time to find out how it all fits and how it's going to work for this group of people. Yeah. To me, that's the enjoyment. That's the fun of it.
No, that's where the magic happens, isn't it?
Yeah, and it is magic when it works out.
You've mentioned before about people that have influenced. Have you had a coaching mentor on your journey? Someone that you can pick up the phone through and bounce ideas off?
Yeah, I mean, not formally. Yeah. I've never had that formally, but and I've already thrown out a few names of people who I do see as a mentor, and they just are. It's nothing we signed up to, but they just are. And I think it's been, for me, kind of situational and where I am, and the people you can connect with in those environments. I really did value being involved in the Institute of Sport kind of system, and being exposed to coaches from other sports. in Tassie, we had an office, and he wasn't there a lot, but we had an Olympic rowing coach, gold medal Olympic rowing coach who sat in our office. And, he volunteered to come out and watch me coach one day and gave me some feedback.
Yeah.
And that was just magic. And we had his athletes, gold medal, rowers, who were also studying medical degrees, come and talk to our 16-year-old, football girls. And, or I went out and ran things for the hockey guys. And, I've just found those environments really stimulating as a coach and challenging, and so the multi-sport stuff, but just whatever environment I'm in, just being able to connect with people, and I think that's been just really valuable. And it's just, as I said, you just send emails or ring people up or send them messages and just see what happens.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Some of the learnings, some of the willingness of other coaches from other sports preparing to share and learn from one another. I think coaching as a sport is one of innovation. I think we coaches are some of the best innovators, going around, and their respect for one another, and because everyone knows that it's not a simple task. So that's good. Why do you do it? What motivates you to coach?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because it's been a hard journey. To be honest, it's been a hard journey, and it's hasn't been, even though it sounds systematic, it hasn't been, and it can be difficult, but I keep coming back to it. So I kind of just see it as it's a vocation.
Yeah.
It's what I do. I can't imagine doing anything else. Sometimes when I've been in between jobs, I've kind of saying, oh, what else could I do? And I think at this point, there's not much else I can do. I'm quite, so highly specialised in my education and training. And, but there's nothing else I'd want to be doing. I really have a passion for it. I love it. There's different, as I've found, there are different ways of doing it. Not necessarily having to be a head coach of a team. There are other ways to be involved and still coach.
Yeah.
And I think the breadth of opportunity is there.
Yeah. It is. I saw that in doing the research that you were also involved heavily in the Canberra United Academy. Is that, firstly, was the Canberra United job, W League job, Academy job, combined into a full-time role for you?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm going to assume that because a significant part of your journey has been in the development, that they're setting up the academy and making sure that's run properly, there's been a lot of joy in that for you as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I worked in it for a little bit before the W League season started, and obviously through the W League season, that's my top priority. And so, but as that's ended now, going back into the academy, I'm really looking forward to that. I do really enjoy development.
Yeah.
And I think the experience I've had in those environments actually lends well to my senior coaching. But it even shifting my mindset coming off the W League, it's actually quite useful because I work with those players, and some of them aren't very old.
Yeah, I know,
some of them are academy age, if you like. But it's like, what do we need at that level? And so therefore, what are the fundamentals I need to be bringing down into the academy? And I think that's, it's a great opportunity for me to go and do that. And I remember thinking that when we were working with the Matildas, these were senior national team players, and it actually, and leading into the 2015 World Cup, we were essentially full-time.
Yeah.
And we were working with these players, I think in the 5-6 months leading into that World Cup, we were not together only for 4 weeks.
Wow.
In that period of time. So we spent a lot of time together, and often 2 trainings a day. And someone who has worked in the youth side, it made me really think about the deficits that those players had, that even though we're working with them this amount of time, we're not able to change it.
Yeah.
So what does need to happen, and when does it need to happen, at what age, and how do we bring players through who, when they do get to be a senior player, have the tools that they need to be successful. And so that's similar now as I shift down from W League into the academy. I think it gives you the same insight.
Yeah. And the fact that, your love of the game was born out of playing outside with friends, in the main who were boys, but for people of your generation and my generation and older, so much of the incidental learning, touch on the ball, happened playing in the street and before school, during school, after school, because there was so much of it. You had lots of opportunity to develop a whole range of things, skills, techniques, unconsciously, I guess, and compare that with today's kids that spend more time on a couch with an electronic device in their hand. There's a huge deficit there, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think we have to be mindful of that, because having been out of the country for a few years and then coming back in and kind of just seeing it with fresh eyes, it's interesting to see. And I think as coaches, we do have to cater for that.
Yeah.
And regardless of where we think they should be, like, I think skill acquisition still needs to be a key component, even in the older teenage age group, and because they're getting less time, as you said, in the incidental moments. And it's just something, as a footballing, us as a country, we need to keep working on. Yeah.
I think one of the good things in listening to Trevor Francis and Ron Smith recently is that the C licence, I think, is going to become more about skill acquisition. Again, it probably was at one stage, whatever we called that, level 1, level 2, or preliminary licence, whatever it was, over the journey. But I think that's going to be a good thing, that we've got coaches that can help players in those areas. You've had a long career. The challenge, as I know, I've got a professional athlete, female athlete in the family that's hopefully going to play basketball at the Olympics, and having a full-time job in sport is a challenge for, call it full-time. Quite often it involves doing 2 or 3 different things together. The male athlete at Melbourne Victory comes into training in the morning, may have breakfast, might have a massage before training, post-training, we'll have the gym there, we'll see a doctor there, the physiotherapist there, and we'll go home at the end of the day. That's not necessarily the case for female athletes. Through all that, I think there's opportunities to be disappointed and things don't quite work out. That's an awful poor way of introducing the question. What I was going to ask you is, how important do you think it is for coaches to be resilient and develop resilience on their journey?
It's obviously really important. And I think whether you're a player or a coach or anyone working in the industry, I think that's something that everyone has. And as you talked about, being innovative too, like especially working on the women's side of the game, whether it's medical staff or, people working on the operations and logistics, as well as the coaching staff, it's we're always having to try and problem solve and try and deliver programs the way we would like to be delivered. With maybe not necessarily the resources or the easy opportunity that may be afforded in full-time professional environments. And so I think we all have that. And I think, having been a player, I think you develop that as well. And I don't think you'd walk into coaching without having some of that to start with. It's certainly not an easy journey, but I think that passion just drives you and keeps you in there.
How about mental health, Vicki? We've obviously, the world's a very, very different place today. We hear mental health in workplaces talked about all the time, particularly in more recent times for professional athletes. Don't hear too much about mental health and coaches about who cares for coaches, who cares for the carers. Have you seen much happen in that space, and what are your thoughts on mental health in the coaching area?
Yeah, I'm probably not aware too much about it. I think the focus is always, or is most often, on the players and staff. So not just coaches, but other staff. I mean, we just work so hard to make sure the players are okay, and so I suppose it's probably it needs to be on the individual and to make sure that we have good networks and systems in place for ourselves. But it would be probably good if there was more awareness of it. You hear it talked about a little bit, but in the practicalities of things, I think it gets a little bit lost. And so whether it's through associations like Football Coaches Association or through our employers, through the federations and clubs and whatever, I think it's definitely improved. I think there's a higher awareness of it now than there used to be, but it's an ongoing battle. Coaching's a difficult role. It's very demanding time-wise. In season, there aren't really days off, and they're long hours, and I think that's been something over my career. It's the ongoing battle of trying to find a balance. We talk about balance, and I don't think in season there is a balance, but I think you need to balance that out of season and find ways of doing that, and just learning to be more, finding time for yourself, even though it's very limited. But I think I've improved as a coach in knowing what I need and how I operate to sustain you, because it's a pretty draining job, mentally, emotionally, physically. It does take a lot out of you. So more probably can be done. I think there's a responsibility on the individual as well. To ask, or to ask for what they need and be firm on that. And I suppose something I've learned too is if an environment can't provide me that, then maybe it's not the environment I should be in.
I think that's a good point. What have been some of your most enjoyable moments as a coach?
I think and I can think even just back to, this past season, but I know it's true of other teams I've worked with and other seasons. It's often quiet moments, or moments where you're just sitting down with players and staff, and those moments that you share. So it's the people, whether it's sitting on a bus or sitting around a dinner table, or at mealtime, or just sharing a laugh. It's the connections are the most enjoyable moments, and being part of someone's journey. Whether it's I have worked with a lot of youth national teams, and seeing all those players come through and where they are now, and being able to connect with them 10 years later, and seeing the person they become. Not just the footballer, but the person they become, and it's a real joy to have been part of their journey. I think they're the most enjoyable moments. There's obviously been successes along the way and different key moments on the field, but I just think it's a real privilege, I think, to be part of getting to know people, and whether that's players and I think too of my US soccer experience and the role I had there, and the privilege it was to go into other people's environments and them sharing everything about what they were doing. And it's the same thing when I've done development work with AFC and FIFA. It's like going to these different countries and people just open up and share with you, and that's a joy. That's a real privilege. And then you maintain those connections. You can be somewhere else and you reconnect, and you still have that relationship. And I think that's the biggest enjoyment.
I have to admit, doing this podcast, as that's been the case for me. People's coaches like yourself, willingness to sit and talk and be honest and transparent and open about their journey and what's worked and what hasn't, has been incredibly rewarding. As a former striker, I have to congratulate you on the part you played in Michelle Heyman coming back to the fore and scoring, I think, 10 goals across the season was that was absolutely fantastic to see. She looked like she was in great shape and certainly looked like she enjoyed sticking the ball in the back of the net again.
Yeah, she didn't lose that knack, did she? So
No.
so that was quite handy for us. But it was really enjoyable seeing her enjoy her football.
Yeah.
She seemed to be in a really good place, and having some time away from the game really gave her a hunger to come back and appreciate the simple joys of being with a team, training. In all up, her body was pretty good, and so she felt good physically, and she was learning. She was learning new things, and so she was engaged. She was a great player, experienced player for the young ones to be around, and just helping them to understand and learn as well. And so it was just, I don't know, I'm lucky, just good timing, that she was ready to come back and she wanted to give it a go again, and she had a big impact on our season. And I think there was a point there where she was close to the record that maybe put a little bit more pressure on. But once she got through that, just really overjoyed for her. Really great to see her achieve that again. And as I said, it was great for us as a team to have her being able to lead from the front.
Yeah, fantastic. You're listening to The Football Coaching Life, a podcast brought to you by Football Coaches Australia and Making Media, the podcast professionals. We're talking with Vicki Linton today, and we're on the downhill run, Vicki. We've spoken about some of those enjoyable moments, and you said that's in and around the people. What are some of the valuable lessons that you've learned along the way?
That's an interesting one. There's very fine lines between what other people measure as success and not success, and that. So we made the top 4 this season by goal difference, by 1 goal, and yet if a couple of results had gone our way, a couple of draws were wins, which probably should have been. We could have been premiers. So we could have been 1st or 5th, just on these small margins. And yet what we did and the success we had was still there, regardless of whether we came 5th, 4th or 1st. So it's kind of understanding that, and I suppose having internal measures of success. And along with that is not getting too high and not getting too low along that journey, because it is a roller coaster. And I think they're important. I've learned a lot along the journey. And I think part of it is, just knowing who you are and knowing your values and just being true to yourself. I think you learn not to listen too much to the external. There's people I trust who I really value their opinion. And I think you need to, I've even learned to hear opinion, but it might not affect me like it used to. I'm able to filter it out a little bit, but I'm still in a position now where I will seek others' opinion, and I'm comfortable with that. So I don't know. There's a few things. There's a lot of things I've learned, I think, along the journey, but there are a few of them.
I like that a lot. What does success look like?
Yeah, I suppose that ties into what we were saying, right? So for me as a coach, is creating a positive learning environment. So part of it's just creating the environment, and then having people learn, grow, and develop. Because if we're doing that, then some of those external successes come. But I can't necessarily control that external stuff. I can control the process. I think I'm a fairly process-orientated coach. But yeah, so that's what success looks like for me, is creating that positive learning environment. And part of that is working with people that I enjoy working with. That's been maybe one of the learnings over the years, is trying to find that.
Yeah.
And that's more valuable to me now than maybe what position I'm in or what what badge I'm wearing.
Yeah.
It's more the environment that we get to work in, and that allows us all to enjoy it, learn, grow, and get the best out of ourselves and each other.
Yeah, I like that. I think I'm right here that it was the first this year you put together an all-female technical team.
Yeah.
At Canberra United. That's a rarity in football these days. Well, not these days. It's just a rarity in football. How many times have you seen that happen before?
Well, it's the first time in the W League in 13 seasons.
Wow.
So it doesn't happen a lot there. But I've seen it with probably the first time I saw it was with the German women's national team.
Yeah.
And they were very deliberate in their development of female coaches, and that filtered up into the national team system.
Yep.
So that was probably the first team I've seen it. It wasn't something that necessarily I went out to do, but at the same time, I wanted to work with people I wanted to work with,
yep.
and have the best people for the team. And often that is people working in women's soccer, women's football,
yep.
and people who have a passion and a drive to work in that environment. And I suppose in the back of my mind, if there was an opportunity to provide it for a female coach, that would be great. But it wasn't something I intentionally at the start went out to do, and it just happened to be they were the best people for the job. And, so I think it's something I'm kind of proud of it, seeing as it's the first time in 13 years. But I do value, I've often been the only female in a male staff.
Yeah.
And, I do also believe in having a range of people, a diversity of people is useful as well. So will that happen again next year? We're not sure.
Yep.
It just depends who's available and who the best people we can get for that season.
Yep.
So it's been good. It doesn't happen a lot. It would be interesting to see it happen more and more, because we don't have this discussion on the men's side. Oh, it's remarkable. They've got an all male technical staff. We don't have that discussion. That's a given. That just is.
Yeah.
So I think it'll be interesting in time if we do start to see more and more of it.
Yeah. No, all power to you. I can remember when the A-League kicked off in 2004, 2005, we had a female sports scientist and a female physio, and to have two females on the bench, it was like, the other A-League teams, well, they weren't necessarily complimentary, and then invariably, however many years later it was, invariably everyone had a couple of females on the bench, just amazing. And we definitely need to find ways to encourage more women into coaching. I was at Football Victoria for a year, a couple of years ago now, and at the annual coaching conference there were, 800 coaches in the room, and of the 800 there were I counted 7 women coaches in the room, and it's just, Football Coaches Australia is doing a whole bunch of things to try and create opportunities. So definitely got to be more done in that space by everyone involved in football. Not a place for me to preach, but I've done it. There you go. Let's wrap this up. If you could offer new coaches at the beginning of the career, in the middle of the career, the end of the career, if you could offer coaches one piece of wisdom, what would that be?
One piece. Wow. Be true to yourself. So I suppose that involves knowing what you're about, knowing who you are, be confident and strong in your convictions, and and operate out of who you are. Be true to yourself. And I think that if you do that, then you can't really go wrong. And regardless of the external factors and what you might hear, and or the criticism you get, or even through failure, right? That you know that you've done all that you can, and I think that's all that you can. And you can ask of yourself, or anyone can ask of you, and I think that will set someone up well in this journey.
I think that's a wonderful place to leave today's conversation. Thanks, Vicki Linton. Very much appreciated.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Thanks for having me on.
You've been listening to The Football Coaching Life, a podcast brought to you by Football Coaches Australia and Making Media, the podcast professionals. Wonderful day. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, please go to footballcoachesoz.org.au, buy a membership, renew a membership, listen to a podcast, watch a video of a podcast. All in all, you have a great day in football.